Picture this. You're standing at the absolute pinnacle of magical power. Kingdoms bow before you. Ancient dragons seek your counsel. The very fabric of reality bends to your will. You've spent decades mastering every forbidden spell, conquering every impossible dungeon, and building an empire that spans continents. And beside you, through every victory and every sacrifice, stands the woman you love more than life itself. The woman you would burn the world for. The woman you trust with every secret, every weakness, every vulnerable moment. Now imagine discovering that she's the one holding the knife at your back. This is the story of Caelus Mordain, the most powerful magic lord the world had ever known, and how betrayal didn't break him. It transformed him into something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. Let me take you back to where it all began, to a night that would reshape the entire magical world forever. The grand citadel of Astervane stood like a monument to impossible power. Its crystalline towers pierced the clouds, each one humming with enough magical energy to level a small nation. Inside the highest chamber, where reality itself seemed to shimmer and warp from the concentrated arcane forces, Caelus Mordain stood before a massive window overlooking his domain. His silver hair, touched by centuries of channeling raw magical forces, caught the moonlight like threads of starfire. At 43, he looked 30, preserved by magics that most couldn't even comprehend existed. Behind him, maps floated in midair, constantly updating with troop movements, mana fluctuations, and reports from the 17 kingdoms under his protection. Protection, that's what he called it. Others whispered darker names in the shadows where they thought he couldn't hear. Tyrant, despot, monster. Let them whisper? He had saved this world 3 times from apocalyptic threats. He had sealed rifts to nightmare dimensions. He had personally dueled and defeated the Demon King Azrathar when the combined armies of humanity had failed. The cost of such power? Everything. Friends who couldn't keep up with his ascension. Family who aged and died while he remained frozen in time. Morality that had to be flexible when the fate of millions hung in the balance. He had made choices that haunted him, performed rituals that would make lesser mages vomit blood just from reading about them, and walked paths through knowledge that drove most who attempted them completely insane. But through it all, one person had remained constant. One light in the darkness of ultimate power. "You're brooding again." The voice was warm honey and silk, sliding through the chamber like a physical caress. Lyanna Shadowvale emerged from the shadows themselves, because of course she could do that now. She'd been his apprentice once, 20 years ago. Now she stood as his equal in all but raw power, and perhaps, in some ways, his superior in subtlety and strategy. She was devastatingly beautiful in a way that seemed almost crafted by magic itself. Raven-black hair cascaded down her back in waves that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Her eyes were a deep violet that held galaxies of secrets. She wore robes of midnight blue that hugged her figure perfectly, inscribed with protective runes that Caelus himself had spent weeks perfecting. Those runes were his promise. Nothing in this world or any other would ever harm her. "Not brooding," Caelus replied, his voice carrying the resonance of someone who had commanded reality itself. "Planning. The Eastern Conclave is moving troops toward the Ashmark border. They think I don't notice because they're using suppression wards." Lyanna glided closer, her fingers trailing along his arm. The touch sent a familiar warmth through him, a reminder that for all his power, he was still human, still capable of feeling something beyond the cold calculation of magical supremacy. "You always notice," she said softly. "That's what makes you magnificent. You see everything, control everything, protect everything." She paused, her next words barely a whisper. "It must be exhausting." Something in her tone made him turn to face her fully. Her expression was unreadable, a mask of perfect composure that he had seen her use when negotiating with hostile kingdoms. "Lyanna?" She smiled, and it was a smile he had seen 1,000 times before. Warm, loving, proud. "I made you something," she said, producing a small crystal vial from the folds of her robe. The liquid inside glowed with a soft azure light, pulsing gently like a heartbeat. "A new stamina restoration potion. I've been working on the formula for months. It uses concentrated moonwell essence and essence of phoenix ash. I thought, after tomorrow's ritual to reinforce the northern barriers, you might need it." Tomorrow. Yes, the ritual. It would take everything he had, channeling enough power to maintain magical shields across 1,000 miles of border for another decade. It would leave him depleted, vulnerable for perhaps the first time in 20 years. But it had to be done. Without those barriers, the Shadowlands would pour forth their corruption, and millions would die. He took the vial, examining it with practiced eyes. The formula was masterful, elegant in its construction. The magical signature was purely Lyanna's work, laced with her unique imprint of shadow and starlight manipulation. "You've outdone yourself," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "This is remarkable." "Drink it now," she urged, her hand cupping his cheek with infinite tenderness. "Let it integrate with your system overnight. By tomorrow, you'll barely feel the strain of the ritual." He should have questioned it. Should have wondered why she seemed so insistent, why her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, why there was a tremor in her hand that she couldn't quite suppress. But he trusted her. After everything, after 2 decades of standing, side by side against impossible odds, after nights spent sharing secrets and dreams and fears that they showed no one else, he trusted her completely. The vial was at his lips when she spoke again, her voice strange and distant. "I'm sorry." He froze. "What?" "I said I'm sorry." And now her smile was different, colder, sharper, the smile of someone about to do something terrible. "Drink it, Caelus. It's too late to stop now." The moment that vial left the containment field, the alchemical reaction began. In 60 seconds, it becomes a bomb capable of taking out this entire tower. So either you drink it and maybe survive what's coming, or we both die here now, and my colleagues complete their work without your interference. Time seemed to freeze. He looked at the vial, then at her, truly seeing her for the first time. How had he missed it? The way she had positioned herself between him and the door. The subtle activation of barrier spells around the room that he had thought were just standard protective measures. The fact that every single security ward he had personally placed on this chamber had been quietly disabled over the past 3 hours. "You're working with the Conclave," he said, his voice flat. Not a question, a statement of damning fact. "Among others," Lyanna replied, and there was something almost like regret in her eyes. Almost. "Did you really think the kingdoms would let you hold ultimate power forever? Did you think we would just accept that one man, however powerful, however well-intentioned, should control the fate of the entire realm?" "We." The word tasted like ash. "You said we." "I am the Speaker of the Council of 12, she said, and her form seemed to grow taller, more terrible, power radiating from her in waves that rivaled his own. How long had she been hiding this? The hidden rulers who actually guide this world, the ones who understand that power must be distributed, controlled, regulated, not concentrated in the hands of one man playing God. The vial was growing warmer in his hand. 30 seconds. He could feel it now, the alchemical chaos building, the magical equivalent of a nuclear bomb counting down. "You want me to drink poison?" "I want you to drink transformation," she corrected. "That potion will strip away your powers, Caelus. All of them. Every ounce of magic you've accumulated over 4 decades of obsessive study and ritual will be torn from your soul and sealed away. You'll become what you were before you ever touched magic. Human, mortal, powerless. And then? And then you'll be imprisoned in the Deephollow Dungeons, not killed. That would be too dangerous. Your knowledge alone makes you valuable. But you'll live out whatever remains of your natural life as a prisoner. A lesson. a warning to anyone else who thinks they can rise above their station and play God. Her voice softened slightly. It's mercy, Caelus. The council wanted you dead. I argued for this. For you. 20 seconds. He could throw the vial, try to escape, maybe survive the blast if he channeled everything into protective shields. But she was ready for that. He could see the spell matrices already formed around her fingers, ready to trigger binding spells that would lock him in place long enough for the explosion to vaporize them both. Why? The question came out broken, and he hated himself for the weakness in it. After everything? Why? For just a moment, genuine emotion flickered across Lyanna's face. Because I loved you, she whispered. I loved you so much it terrified me. And I watched you become something that wasn't quite human anymore. Watched you make decisions that cost thousands of lives because you decided they were acceptable losses. Watched you perform rituals that left you more monster than man. Her eyes glistened. The man I fell in love with died years ago, Caelus. I'm just finishing what power already started. 10 seconds. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the truth in her eyes. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a crusade. She believed she was saving the world from him. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps he had become the very thing he had sworn to fight against. Perhaps the night he had sacrificed 300 prisoners to prevent a demonic incursion, telling himself their lives were worth the millions saved. Perhaps that night had been the death of the man Lyanna had loved. 5 seconds. If I drink this, he said quietly, promise me something. Anything. When you realize you were wrong, when the kingdoms fall to threats they can't handle without me, when people die because you removed the one thing keeping them safe, remember this moment. Remember that you chose this. 3 seconds. Her face was stone. I'll remember. He drank. The liquid burned like liquid starfire going down his throat. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the pain began. Not physical pain, though that would have been preferable. This was the pain of having your very soul torn apart. Every spell he had ever mastered, every ounce of magical power he had accumulated, every arcane secret burned into his consciousness, all of it was being ripped away. He screamed, and it was not the scream of a powerful mage. It was the scream of a man watching everything he was being destroyed. Lyanna watched without moving, tears streaming down her face, as the man she had loved and betrayed collapsed to his knees. The silver in his hair faded to simple gray. The eternal youth sloughed off like shed skin, revealing a man who suddenly looked his true age. The aura of power that had surrounded him like a corona of unstoppable force guttered out like a candle in a hurricane. When he finally stopped screaming, he looked up at her with eyes that were still sharp, still intelligent, but completely, utterly mortal. You've made a terrible mistake, he gasped. Perhaps, she said softly, but it's done now. The doors burst open. Guards in the armor of 12 different kingdoms poured in, binding spells flying from their hands to wrap around the now powerless mage. Caelus didn't fight. There was no point. Without his magic, he was just a man. An old, exhausted, broken man. As they dragged him away, Lyanna turned back to the window, unable to watch. Behind her, she heard one of the council representatives approach. Is it done, Speaker? It's done, she confirmed, her voice empty. The age of the magic lords is over. The age of the council begins. And the prisoner? Send him to Deephollow, the deepest cell. Let him rot. What Lyanna didn't know, what none of them knew, was that Caelus Mordain was not a man who accepted defeat. Even as they dragged him through the corridors he had once ruled, even as they threw him into a transport cage warded with suppression runes, his mind was already working, already planning. They had taken his power. But power could be regained. They had taken his freedom. But prisons could be escaped. What they couldn't take What they didn't even know existed was the backup plan he had prepared years ago. A contingency for exactly this kind of betrayal. A ritual hidden so deep, encoded so carefully, that even Lyanna hadn't found it. In 3 months, when the next lunar eclipse aligned with the convergence of ley lines beneath Deephollow Dungeon, something would activate. Something he had prepared for a day he hoped would never come. It would give him a chance. One chance. And if there was one thing Caelus Mordain was legendary for, it was making the most of any chance given to him. The betrayal was complete. The fall was absolute. But the story, the real story, was just beginning. Deephollow Dungeon earned its name. Built into the bones of an ancient mountain, it descended for miles into the earth, each level more nightmarish than the last. The upper levels held common criminals, thieves and murderers serving out their sentences in cells that were at least somewhat humane. The middle levels held political prisoners, rebels and revolutionaries kept in darkness but given enough food and water to survive. The lowest levels, the levels that only a handful of people in the entire world even knew existed, held something different. Monsters. Magical creatures too dangerous to kill, but too valuable to destroy. Ancient vampires sealed in sunstone. Liches kept in perpetual dissolution. Dragons reduced to nothing but consciousness trapped in crystal prisons. And now, one fallen magic lord. They had put Caelus in a cell at the very bottom of the dungeon, in a section that hadn't been used in 300 years. The cell itself was a masterwork of magical suppression. Runestones covered every surface, each one humming with power designed to prevent even the smallest spark of magic from forming. The air itself was treated with alchemical compounds that dulled the mind and weakened the body. The walls were carved from nullstone, a rare mineral that actively absorbed and destroyed magical energies. He had been here for 2 weeks. 2 weeks of darkness broken only by the faint glow of suppression runes. 2 weeks of thin gruel and stale water delivered through a slot in the door by guards who never spoke. 2 weeks of feeling the phantom pain of his missing magic like an amputee feeling a severed limb. Most mages, stripped of their power, would have gone mad by now. The loss of magic for someone who had wielded it for decades was like losing a sense. Like going blind and deaf simultaneously. The world became flat, colorless, dead. Many prisoners in Deephollow's lowest levels had simply stopped eating, choosing death over the torment of powerlessness. Caelus was not most mages. He sat in the center of his cell, legs crossed, eyes closed, breathing in the measured rhythm he had learned from a meditation master in the eastern monasteries 40 years ago. His body was weak, wasted from lack of proper food and the magical suppressants in the air. His mind, however, remained sharp. Sharp enough to count the days. Sharp enough to feel the gradual shift in the ley lines deep beneath the mountain. Sharp enough to know that his waiting was almost over. On the 23rd day of his imprisonment, something changed. It started as a vibration, so subtle that the guards walking their rounds didn't notice. A tremor in the stone that matched no earthquake, no natural phenomenon. Deep beneath the dungeon, far below even Caelus's cell, something ancient was waking up. The ritual Caelus had prepared years ago was elegant in its simplicity. He had hidden a fragment of his power, a tiny seed of magical essence, in a place no one would ever think to look. Inside a pocket dimension tied to his life force, anchored to a series of ley line convergences that would only align during specific astronomical events. The convergence was happening now, and that seed was germinating. The prison's suppression fields fought against it. Alarms began to sound in the upper levels as monitoring mages detected the surge of unauthorized magical activity. But the ritual was designed to be unstoppable once activated. Slowly, inexorably, that fragment of power began to seep through the dimensional barriers. It found its way to Caelus through the ley lines themselves, following the connection that could never be severed. Even stripped of magic, he was still attuned to the fundamental forces of reality. That connection was like a beacon, and his hidden power was coming home. The suppression runes in his cell began to crack. Caelus opened his eyes, and for the first time in weeks, there was light in them that wasn't just reflected from the runes. Deep within his chest, he felt something spark. Not his old power. That was gone, sealed away by Lyanna's potion in a way that would take years to undo. But this was something different. Something smaller, but more primal. A fragment of raw, unformed magical potential. It wasn't enough to break out. Wasn't enough to fight. But it was enough to survive what came next. The guards burst into his cell 3 minutes later, weapons drawn, shouting orders. They found him standing in the center of the room, and for just a moment they hesitated. Because even powerless, even broken, Caelus Mordain carried himself like someone who commanded reality itself. "The council has made a decision regarding your sentence," the captain of the guards said, though his voice wavered slightly. These were men who had heard the legends, who knew exactly who they were guarding. "You're being transferred to a new program, the Academy Reclamation Initiative." Caelus said nothing, just waited. "You will be enrolled as a student at Archon Academy," the captain continued. "The council has decided that your knowledge is too valuable to waste. You will be taught to serve the new order. You will be monitored constantly. Any sign of rebellion, any attempt to reclaim your former power, and you will be executed immediately." Finally, Caelus spoke, his voice hoarse from disuse but still carrying authority. "The Academy? How ironic. Where I learned magic, I'll now learn to live without it?" "You'll learn to serve," the captain corrected. "As a researcher, a scholar, stripped of practical magical ability but still useful in theoretical applications. The council is generous. They're giving you a chance to contribute to society in a controlled environment rather than rotting here forever." A chance. They were giving him a chance. Fools. They thought they were being clever, using his knowledge while keeping him contained. They didn't realize they were giving him exactly what he needed. Access to an academy, with its libraries, its resources, its students who might be manipulated. And most importantly, access to the magical energies that would be flowing through every corridor, every classroom, every laboratory. With time, patience, and the fragment of power slowly rebuilding in his chest, he could work with that. "I accept," he said simply. The captain nodded, though he looked unsettled by how easily the former magic lord had agreed. "You'll wear suppression cuffs at all times. You'll be assigned a monitor who will observe everything you do. You'll live in the slave quarters and work under constant supervision. One wrong move and I die," Caelus interrupted. "Yes, I understand the terms of my imprisonment perfectly, Captain. Shall we proceed?" The transfer took 3 days. They moved him under heavy guard, suppression fields layered around the transport carriage so thoroughly that he could barely breathe. Other prisoners shared the carriage, men and women who had been conscripted into the Academy's service for various crimes. They all avoided looking at him, some intuitive instinct warning them that even powerless, this man was dangerous. Caelus spent the journey in meditation, feeling the fragment of power in his chest growing slowly stronger. It would take months, perhaps years, to build up enough to matter. But he had time. The council thought they had neutered him, turned him into a tool they could use and discard. They would learn their mistake. Eventually. When they finally arrived at Archon Academy, Caelus opened his eyes to see the place where, 45 years ago, a young man with barely any magical talent had walked through these same gates and sworn to become the greatest mage in history. The irony wasn't lost on him. The academy hadn't changed much. The same towers spiraling toward the sky, each one dedicated to a different school of magic. The same courtyards, where students practiced spells under the watchful eyes of instructors. The same grand library where he had spent countless sleepless nights devouring forbidden texts. The same everything, except now he walked through it in chains. A woman was waiting for them at the gates. She was young, perhaps 25, with sharp features and eyes that missed nothing. Her robes marked her as a senior instructor, someone who had achieved significant magical prowess. The magical aura around her was controlled, refined, powerful in a way that spoke of natural talent carefully honed. "I am Instructor Celine Ashworth," she announced. "I'll be your primary monitor and supervisor. You will address me as instructor or ma'am. You will obey every command I give without question. You will be a perfect prisoner." Caelus finished for her, his voice dry. "Yes, I'm familiar with the requirements. Shall we skip the intimidation speech and proceed to my quarters?" Celine's eyes flashed with anger. "You were a magic lord for 2 decades. I'm aware of your history. But that man is dead. You're nothing now but a resource to be utilized. I suggest you remember that before your pride gets you killed." "Pride is all I have left, instructor," Caelus replied calmly. "I suggest you let me keep it, or you'll find your resource significantly less cooperative." For a moment they stared at each other, predator to predator, both recognizing in the other someone who played the long game. Then Selena smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Follow me. Let me show you what your life will be like for however long the council decides to keep you breathing." She led him through the academy, and every step was torture. Students passed them in the hallways, laughing and chatting about classes and spells, and the kind of casual magical practice that was now forever denied to him. Some of them recognized him, gasped, whispered. The legend of Caelus Mordain had reached even these young students, but the man they saw was not the silver-haired god of magic from the stories. He was a broken old man in suppression cuffs, being led like a dog on a leash. Let them look. Let them whisper. He would remember every face, every name, every insult. And when the time came for his return to power, they would all learn what it meant to mock a fallen king. The slave quarters were in the academy's basement, a series of small cells where prisoners conscripted into service were kept. His cell was particularly small, barely 8 feet by 8 feet, with a thin mattress on the floor and a bucket in the corner. A single window high up on the wall let in a sliver of natural light. "You'll wake at dawn," Celine instructed. "You'll be escorted to the research wing, where you'll spend your days transcribing ancient texts and cataloging magical components. You'll eat 1 meal at midday and 1 in the evening, both in your cell. You'll be allowed 1 hour of exercise in the courtyard per day under guard. Any deviation from this schedule will result in punishment." "Punishment?" Caelus asked. "What could you do to me that's worse than this?" Selena pulled out a small remote control, barely larger than her thumb. "These suppression cuffs have a pain compliance feature. Level 1 is comparable to being stung by 100 wasps simultaneously. Level 10 is designed to induce unconsciousness through pure agony. Would you like a demonstration?" Caelus shook his head. "That won't be necessary." "Good, then we understand each other." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "For what it's worth, I read your treatise on dimensional manipulation. It was brilliant. Pity that brilliance is now being wasted on transcription work. But then, that's what happens when you let power corrupt you into thinking you're above the law." "Power didn't corrupt me," Caelus said quietly. "It revealed me. There's a difference." "Is there?" Selene challenged. "Because from where I stand, the result was the same. Thousands dead. Kingdoms terrified. One man with enough power to end the world if he chose. The council was right to stop you." "Perhaps," Caelus conceded, "but ask yourself this, instructor. Who stops the council?" She had no answer for that, so she left without another word, locking the door behind her. Alone in his cell, Caelus sat on the thin mattress and closed his eyes, feeling the fragment of power in his chest pulse with his heartbeat. It was so small, barely a candle flame compared to the inferno he once commanded. But it was his. They had taken everything else, but this tiny seed of magic had slipped through their nets, had waited for the right moment to return to him. He would nurture it, grow it, feed it with every scrap of magical energy he could glean from living in an academy saturated with arcane power. It would take time, years probably, but eventually, that seed would bloom into something terrible and beautiful. And when it did, every person who had betrayed him, every council member who had voted for his imprisonment, every guard who had mocked him, every student who had whispered about the fallen king, they would all learn that Caelus Mordain's story wasn't over. It was just beginning a new chapter, one written in revenge. The first month as a slave student at Archon Academy was an exercise in absolute humiliation. Caelus woke each morning to the sound of bells ringing through the complex, calling students to their classes. But while they rushed to lecture halls and practical training grounds, he was escorted by guards to the research wing's basement, where ancient texts and forgotten artifacts waited to be catalogued by disposable labor. The work itself wasn't challenging. Transcription of arcane texts, organization of component inventories, basic cleanup of failed experimental equipment. It was work designed to be mind-numbing, to break the spirit of anyone who had once commanded great power. Most of the other slaves assigned to this work were former criminals with minor magical ability, people who had broken low-level laws and were serving out their sentences in service to the academy. None of them talked to him. Word had spread quickly about who he was, and even in chains, even powerless, Caelus Mordain carried an aura that warned others to keep their distance. He preferred it that way. Conversation would only slow down his real work, because while his hands transcribed texts and his body performed menial labor, his mind was doing something far more important. He was learning the rhythms of the academy, the shifts of the guards, the patterns of magical energy flowing through the building, the locations of every ward, every security measure, every potential weakness in the systems designed to contain him. And most importantly, he was feeding the fragment of magic growing in his chest. It was delicate work, requiring patience that would have driven most mages mad. Every time someone practiced a spell near him, every time magical energy flowed through the ambient environment, he would draw in the tiniest fraction of it. Not enough to trigger alarms, not enough to be noticed by the sophisticated monitoring systems watching his every move. Just droplets of power, filtered through his suppression cuffs, absorbed into that growing seed. It was working. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, but working. What had been a spark was now a small flame. What had been a whisper was becoming a voice. In another few months, if he was careful, if he was patient, he might have enough power to attempt small spells. Nothing dramatic, nothing that would alert his captors, but enough to begin the long road back to what he had been. Instructor Lyanna monitored him constantly, as promised. She was intelligent, observant, and deeply suspicious of everything he did. But even she couldn't watch him every second of every day. She had classes to teach, research of her own to conduct, responsibilities beyond babysitting one fallen mage. It was during one of these unsupervised moments that Caelus made his first real discovery. He was in the artifact storage room, cataloging a new shipment of confiscated magical items, when he found it. A ring, small and unassuming, made of tarnished silver with a stone so dark it seemed to absorb light. To most people, it would look like worthless junk. But Caelus recognized it immediately. A shadow meld ring, created by the ancient Umbral Covenant. Wearing it would allow the user to partially phase into the shadow realm, making them invisible to most forms of detection. The ring was sitting in a bin marked for disposal, deemed too weak to be worth studying. The suppression cuffs on his wrists prevented him from touching it directly, from accessing its power. But he could still hide it. Carefully, using techniques he had learned from a master thief he'd once arrested, he palmed the ring and slipped it into a tear in the lining of his rough-spun prisoner's tunic. It was a risk. If discovered, he would be punished severely. But risk was the currency of revolution, and Caelus was planning the greatest revolution in magical history. That night, alone in his cell, He examined his prize. The ring pulsed with a faint magical signature, barely perceptible even to his trained senses. With his full power, he could have activated it with a thought. Now it was useless to him. But now and forever were not the same thing. When his power returned enough, this ring could be the key to moving undetected through the academy, to gathering resources, to preparing. He hid it beneath a loose stone in the corner of his cell, marking the location carefully in his mind. Then he returned to his meditation, feeding the growing flame inside him with stolen scraps of ambient magic. The second month brought changes. The academy was preparing for its annual proving, a competition where senior students demonstrated their abilities before potential employers and patrons. The best students would receive offers from the magical guilds, the royal courts, the prestigious research institutes. The mediocre would find work as hedge mages in small towns. The failures would be sent home in disgrace. Caelus remembered his own proving, 45 years ago. He had stunned everyone by defeating a fifth-year student despite being only in his second year. That victory had earned him the attention of Archmage Valerian, who had taken him on as an apprentice and set him on the path to ultimate power. Now he would watch other young mages achieve their dreams while he scrubbed floors. The irony was almost poetic. Celine seemed to take perverse pleasure in assigning him to clean the grand arena, where the proving would take place. "I thought you might enjoy seeing what you've lost," she said when giving him the assignment. "Remind yourself of what happens when ambition exceeds wisdom." "Wisdom is just another word for fear," Caelus replied, not looking up from his work. "The wise never accomplish anything worth remembering." "The foolish accomplish their own destruction," Celine countered, which seems to prove my point nicely. But despite her casual cruelty, Caelus noticed something interesting. Celine was nervous. Her usual confidence was cracked, and she kept glancing at him when she thought he wasn't looking, as if expecting him to suddenly transform and reclaim his old power. Good. Fear was useful. Fear made people make mistakes. The proving itself was a grand affair. Hundreds of students competed over 3 days, demonstrating combat magic, ritual work, theoretical knowledge, and practical problem-solving. Caelus was assigned to maintenance duty, cleaning up after each event, replacing damaged equipment, preparing the arena for the next demonstration. It put him in the perfect position to observe. And what he observed was fascinating. The current generation of students was talented, no question. Some of them showed potential that rivaled his own at their age. But they were also soft, pampered, trained in controlled environments with safety measures in place. They had never faced real danger, never stared into the abyss of true magical power, and forced themselves to take one more step. They were students. He was, and always would be, something more. On the third day of the proving, something unexpected happened. One of the demonstrations went catastrophically wrong. A student attempting an advanced summoning ritual lost control of the spell, and a minor demon materialized in the center of the arena. It wasn't powerful, barely more threatening than a large dog, but it was enough to send the crowd into panic. The instructors responded immediately, casting binding spells and protective barriers, but the demon was clever, as demons often are, and it slipped through their initial attempts at containment. It was heading straight for the crowd when Caelus acted. He shouldn't have. He was a prisoner, powerless, supposed to be invisible. But old instincts died hard, and when he saw that demon heading for a section of seating where young children sat with their families, his body moved before his mind could stop it. The fragment of power in his chest flared. It wasn't much, barely a whisper of what he had once commanded. But in that moment of desperation, it was enough. He drew on it, shaped it with skills honed over decades, and sent a pulse of pure dismissal force directly at the demon. The creature exploded into black smoke, banished back to its home dimension. The arena fell silent. Every eye turned to Caelus, standing in the maintenance area, suppression cuffs glowing hot from the strain of trying to contain the magic he had just channeled. Celine was staring at him with an expression of absolute horror. "Impossible," she whispered. "You're powerless. The suppression cuffs, the dampening fields, the potion. You shouldn't be able to—" "Shouldn't and can't are different words, instructor," Caelus said calmly, even as blood began to drip from his nose, his body paying the price for channeling even that small amount of magic through his damaged channels. "You would do well to remember that." The aftermath was swift and brutal. He was dragged before the council's representatives at the academy, interrogated for hours about how he had managed to access magic, when every precaution had been taken to prevent exactly that. He told them nothing, simply repeated that he had acted on instinct, that he didn't understand how it had happened, that it had been a momentary surge he couldn't replicate. They didn't believe him, of course, but they also couldn't prove otherwise. The security systems had detected no buildup of magical energy before his casting, no warning signs that he was gathering power. As far as their instruments could tell, he had somehow channeled magic that didn't exist. The punishment was harsh. They upgraded his suppression cuffs to a more powerful model, added additional monitoring wards to his cell, and restricted his movements even further. But they didn't kill him. The council wanted him alive, wanted his knowledge, wanted to believe they could break him and make him serve. That was their fatal mistake. Because while they celebrated containing the threat, while they congratulated themselves on upgrading his restraints, while they grew complacent in their supposed victory, Caelus was smiling. He had revealed a fraction of his returning power, yes, but in doing so, he had accomplished 3 things. First, he had saved innocent lives, which mattered more than his captors would ever understand. Second, he had proven to himself that his magic was genuinely returning, that his patient feeding of the flame was working. And third, most important of all, he had shown every student in that arena that even stripped of power, even broken and chained, Caelus Mordain was still capable of the impossible. They would remember that. They would whisper about it. They would begin to question whether the legends about him were exaggerations or understatements. And some of them, the ambitious ones, the hungry ones, the ones who looked at the council's control and saw tyranny rather than order, some of them would start to wonder what would happen if the greatest mage in history ever regained his full power. Seeds were being planted, not just in his chest, but in the minds of those around him. Revolution, Caelus had learned long ago, started not with armies and warfare, but with ideas and possibilities. He was patient. He could wait. After all, what was a few more months or years compared to the eternity of his revenge? The academy continued its cycles. Students learned, graduated, moved on. New faces replaced old ones. Seasons changed. And through it all, Caelus Mordain worked quietly in the shadows, a broken king gathering his strength, piece by stolen piece. The council thought they had won. They would learn how wrong they were. But that revelation was still to come. For now, there was work to do, power to rebuild, and a long game to play. And Caelus had always been exceptional at playing the long game. 6 months into his captivity at Archon Academy, Caelus had developed a routine that appeared, to all external observation, to be the resigned acceptance of a broken man. He woke with the dawn bells, submitted to the daily inspection by guards, performed his assigned transcription and cleaning duties without complaint, ate his meager meals, and returned to his cell each night like a well-trained animal. It was a brilliant performance. Beneath that facade of compliance, however, every moment was calculated. Every motion had purpose. The shuffle in his walk that made him seem older and weaker than he actually was. The way he kept his eyes downcast in the presence of authority, projecting submission while actually memorizing guard rotations and security ward placements. The slight tremor in his hands that made people underestimate his capability for fine magical manipulation. The fragment of power in his chest had grown considerably. What had been a candle flame was now a small bonfire, carefully shielded and hidden from detection. He had gotten better at drawing in ambient magical energy, finding ways to siphon power from the very wards designed to suppress him. The new, more powerful suppression cuffs were actually easier to circumvent than the old ones. Their designers had focused so much on raw power suppression that they had left subtle vulnerabilities in their detection matrices. Amateurs. Caelus had helped design magical suppression systems for Deephollow. He knew every possible weakness because he had been paranoid enough to consider them all. The council's mages were talented, but they lacked his decades of paranoid preparation. It was during his 7th month that opportunity presented itself in an unexpected form. Her name was Mira Thornhart, and she was everything the council had trained her to be. A prodigy. 17 years old, top of her class in combat magic, with an affinity for elemental manipulation that bordered on supernatural. She had that particular combination of talent and confidence that marked someone destined for greatness. She was also curious about things she shouldn't be curious about. Caelus first noticed her watching him during his exercise hour in the courtyard. While other students gave him a wide berth, treating him like a dangerous animal or a pathetic has-been, Mira studied him with analytical intensity. She was trying to reconcile the legend with the reality, the stories of the unstoppable magic lord with the prisoner cleaning floors. He ignored her, of course. Attention was dangerous. But he marked her in his memory, noted her presence, and filed her away as either a potential asset or a potential threat. The decision of which category she fell into came 3 days later. He was in the artifact storage room again, his favorite assignment because it gave him access to the residual magical energies clinging to confiscated items. Most of the artifacts were minor, barely worth the effort to catalog. But occasionally, something interesting appeared. Today's shipment included a staff that had once belonged to a storm mage, still crackling with latent lightning, and a set of focus crystals that hummed with barely contained power. He was carefully absorbing trace energy from the crystals when he felt her presence. "That's forbidden," Mira said from the doorway. "Prisoners aren't allowed direct contact with artifacts above Class C rating." Caelus didn't turn around, didn't show surprise at being caught. "I'm not touching them," he replied calmly, which was technically true. His hands were a careful 3 inches away from the crystals. "I'm cataloging them for storage, standard procedure." "You're pulling energy from them." It wasn't a question. She had noticed, which meant she was more observant than he had given her credit for. "I can see the draw patterns. It's subtle, but it's there. You're feeding the magic into something. Into yourself?" Now he turned to face her, and for the first time in months, he allowed his expression to be something other than broken submission. "If you're going to report me, get it over with. Otherwise, close the door behind you. We're letting the cold air in." Mira hesitated, which told Caelus everything he needed to know. If she had intended to report him, she would have already left to fetch a guard. Instead, she stepped further into the room and closed the door. "I've been researching you," she said, "reading everything I could find about your rise to power. Do you know what I discovered?" "I'm sure you're about to tell me." "You weren't born powerful. You didn't come from a magical bloodline. You weren't discovered by some ancient mentor who recognized hidden potential. You started as literally the weakest student in your class at this very academy. They almost threw you out after first year because your magical output was barely measurable." "Interesting history lesson," Caelus said dryly. "Is there a point?" "The point is that somehow, that weak student became the most powerful mage in recorded history. And I want to know how." Her eyes were blazing with hunger, with ambition that rivaled his own at her age. "I want to know what you learned, what you discovered, what secret you found that let you go from nobody to legend." "And you think I'll just tell you?" Caelus laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. "Share decades of accumulated knowledge with a stranger because she asks nicely?" "No," Mira admitted, "but I think you might tell me in exchange for help getting out of here." The room fell silent. Outside, they could hear students passing in the hallway, laughing about some minor drama. Inside, Two people who understood ambition stared at each other, measuring, calculating. "That's treason," Caelus said finally. "Helping a prisoner escape. The council would execute you." "Only if they caught us." Mira pulled a small device from her pocket, a silver disc inscribed with privacy runes. She activated it, and suddenly the conversation was sealed in a bubble of silence that no external monitoring could penetrate. "I'm not stupid. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't thought this through." "Why?" Caelus demanded. "You have everything. Talent, recognition, a brilliant future ahead of you. Why risk it for a broken old mage?" "Because the council is wrong," Mira said with absolute conviction. "I've seen how they operate. They don't want powerful mages. They want controlled mages, obedient mages. They take anyone who shows exceptional ability and either recruit them into their organization or neutralize them. They claim it's for stability, for peace, but really it's just about maintaining their monopoly on power." She moved closer, her voice dropping to an intense whisper. "I'm good, Caelus. Really good. Better than my instructors, I can feel it. But every time I push too hard, every time I show too much potential, someone has a quiet talk with me about the dangers of excessive ambition. They're scared of what I might become, just like they were scared of you." "So you want to use me," Caelus said. "Learn my secrets, leverage my knowledge to break past the artificial limits they've placed on you." "Yes," Mira said simply. "But I also think you want out of here. I think despite everything they've done to suppress you, you're rebuilding your power somehow. And I think you need help to do it faster." She was perceptive. Dangerously so. Caelus studied her for a long moment, reading the determination in her face, the steel in her spine, the hunger that drove her. She reminded him of someone, though it took him a moment to place who. She reminded him of Lyanna, 20 years ago, before the betrayal, when they had been partners in ambition, pushing each other to greater heights. That should have warned him off. Should have made him reject her offer immediately. But Caelus had learned something in his months of captivity. He had learned that his pride and his insistence on working alone had been his downfall. Lyanna had been right about one thing. He had isolated himself, pushed away anyone who might have questioned his decisions, built an empire where he answered to no one. That isolation had made his betrayal possible. It had made him vulnerable. Perhaps it was time to try a different approach. "You're taking a tremendous risk," he said. "I could be manipulating you, using you, planning to betray you the moment I have what I need." "You could be," Mira agreed. "But I don't think you are. I've watched you for months now. You saved those children during the proving when any sensible prisoner would have stayed down and let the instructors handle it. You work with precision and care even on tasks that don't matter. You're not trying to escape because you can't yet. You're waiting, planning, building." She extended her hand. "I'm offering you an alliance. I provide resources, cover, assistance in gathering power. You provide knowledge, training, guidance in becoming something more than the council will ever allow. Partners, not master and student. Equals working toward a common goal." Caelus looked at her outstretched hand. It could be a trap. The council could have sent her to test him, to see if he would reveal the full extent of his plans. It would be exactly the kind of subtle manipulation they would use, but it could also be genuine. And if it was, if this brilliant, ambitious young mage was offering a true partnership, he had rebuilt empires from nothing. He could do it again. But this time, perhaps, not alone. He took her hand. "If you betray me," he said quietly, "there is nowhere in any world where you'll be safe. Do you understand?" "If I betray you," Mira replied with a fierce grin, "I'll deserve whatever you do to me. Do we have a deal?" "We have a deal." The partnership began cautiously, as all good conspiracies do. Mira had access that Caelus lacked. Unrestricted movement through the academy. The ability to visit the library. Connections with other students. And even some junior instructors. She began bringing him books, carefully selected texts that wouldn't be obviously suspicious, but that contained the knowledge he needed to accelerate his power recovery. In exchange, he taught her. Not the flashy combat magic that made other students famous, but the deep theory, the fundamental principles that separated adequate mages from legendary ones. He showed her how to see the underlying structure of reality, how to manipulate magical forces at levels that most mages never even conceived existed. She was an exceptional student. Within 2 weeks, she had implemented one of his theoretical optimization techniques and improved her elemental control by 30%. Her instructors noticed, of course, praised her for the breakthrough. She humbly credited it to additional private study. They had no idea she was being taught by the greatest mage in history. 3 months into their alliance, Caelus's power had grown enough that he could attempt something ambitious. The shadow meld ring he had hidden in his cell, which had been useless to him before, could now be activated. Barely, and only for short periods, but it was enough. He tested it one night, slipping from his cell while the guards thought him sleeping. The ring's power merged him partially with shadow, making him effectively invisible to normal detection. The monitoring wards in the academy were sophisticated, but they were designed to detect active magical casting, not passive effects like the ring's camouflage. He walked through corridors he had been forbidden from entering, visited laboratories where advanced research was being conducted, stood in the Grand Library at midnight, surrounded by texts he had written himself, now being studied by mages who had no idea the author stood among them. It was intoxicating, this taste of freedom, but also frustrating, because he still couldn't leave. The academy's perimeter was protected by wards specifically keyed to detect prisoners and those he couldn't circumvent yet. Not without more power. Not without more time. But that time was coming. With Mira's help, his power was growing exponentially faster than it would have alone. The flame in his chest was now a furnace, hot enough that he had to actively suppress it to avoid detection. Another year, perhaps less, and he would be strong enough to break the suppression cuffs entirely. Strong enough to leave when and how he chose. Strong enough to begin the real work of his revenge. The council thought they had contained him. Lyanna thought she had saved the world from him. They were all wrong. They had just given him time to plan, to prepare, to become something far more dangerous than he had been before. The old Caelus Mordain had been powerful but isolated, feared but not respected. The new Caelus, the one being forged in the crucible of betrayal and imprisonment, would be different. He would be patient, strategic, allies instead of subjects, collaboration instead of domination. And when he finally revealed himself, when he stepped back into the world with power fully restored, well, the council would learn that killing a king only makes him a martyr, imprisoning a legend only makes him a myth, and destroying a mage who understands true power, that just makes him inevitable. The seasons changed. Winter brought snow that blanketed the academy in white, muffling the usual chaos of student life. Caelus's second year of captivity passed into his third, and with each passing month, the careful balance of power shifted incrementally in his favor. His alliance with Mira had evolved beyond simple quid pro quo exchange of knowledge and resources. She had become something he hadn't expected, a genuine partner. She challenged his assumptions, questioned his methods, and brought a fresh perspective to magical theory that he found himself actually respecting. It was strange, after decades of standing alone at the pinnacle, to work with someone as an equal rather than as a subordinate. More students had noticed the change in her capabilities. Mira Thornhart, already considered talented, had become exceptional. Her instructors attributed it to natural development and hard work. A few suspected she had found some hidden texts or learned some advanced technique. None of them suspected the truth, that the greatest living magical theorist was personally tutoring her in the fundamentals of reality manipulation. Through Mira, Caelus built a network. Carefully, slowly, identifying other students who chafed under the council's restrictions. The ambitious ones, the curious ones, the ones who looked at magical theory and saw possibilities rather than limits. Never told them who their true patron was. Mira acted as an intermediary, sharing techniques she had developed that were actually Caelus's teachings filtered through her interpretation. Within 18 months, there were 27 students across 3-year levels who had unknowingly become part of his conspiracy. They didn't know they were revolutionaries. They just thought they were part of a study group exploring advanced magical theory. But Caelus was planting seeds, building a foundation, creating a generation of mages who owed their advancement to his teaching rather than the council's doctrine. It was in his 26th month of captivity that everything changed. He was in his cell, deep in meditation, when he felt it. A disturbance in the magical fabric of the academy. Not an attack or an accident. Something else. Something deliberately hidden but vast enough that even his suppressed senses detected it. Someone was performing a major ritual. Somewhere in the academy, someone was channeling enough power to alter reality itself. The timing was wrong. There were no scheduled examinations requiring that level of magical output. No research projects approved for that kind of power draw. This was unauthorized, hidden, and dangerous, and it was happening in the sub-basement, in the sealed research wing that even instructors rarely visited. Caelus made a decision that would have been unthinkable even 6 months ago. He activated the shadow meld ring, slipped from his cell while the guards changed shifts, and went to investigate. Moving through the academy unseen had become almost routine, but this was different. He was heading toward an active magical working of tremendous power. The closer he got, the more he could feel reality bending, warping, threatening to tear. The sealed research wing was protected by wards that would have killed him to pass through if he had tried while still powerless. Now, with months of patient power accumulation, he could barely manage it. The wards recognized him as a prisoner, tried to lock him down, but he had learned their patterns, found their weaknesses. With effort and pain, he slipped through. What he found in the ritual chamber beyond stopped him cold. Instructor Celine Ashworth stood in the center of a massive summoning circle, arms raised, power flowing through her in quantities that should have torn her apart. But she was channeling it, controlling it, directing it toward something. Around her, 5 other instructors lay unconscious, their magical energy being siphoned into the working. And in the air above her head, reality was splitting open. Caelus recognized the spell immediately, a dimensional anchor. She was trying to create a permanent gateway to another reality. It was magic so advanced, so dangerous, that the Council had forbidden even theoretical research into it decades ago. The potential for catastrophe was absolute. "Instructor," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber despite the maelstrom of magical forces. "You need to stop. Now." Celine's head snapped toward him, eyes wide with shock. "How did you—" She saw the shadow meld ring on his finger, saw the power radiating from him despite his suppression cuffs, and her expression shifted from shock to understanding. "You've been hiding your recovery. All this time you've been— We can discuss my deceptions later," Caelus interrupted, moving closer. "Right now, you're about to create a tear in reality that could destroy this entire academy. You're pulling too much power too fast. The dimensional walls are already fracturing. In 3 minutes, maybe less, this portal is going to destabilize and create a cascade that will pull everything in a 5-mile radius into the void between worlds." "I know what I'm doing," Celine snapped. "I've studied this ritual for years." "Studied, yes, but you've never performed it. I have." Caelus moved to the edge of the summoning circle, analyzing the spell structure with senses honed by decades of experience. It was elegant work, he had to admit. Celine was brilliant, but brilliance without wisdom was just another word for disaster. "You're using the Valteran method for dimensional anchoring. It's flawed. The anchor point will collapse under its own weight before stabilization completes. You need to add a counter-rotation to the third outer ring and reverse the polarity on the— I don't take orders from prisoners, Celine said, but her voice wavered. She could feel it now, the instability Caelus was describing. The ritual was already starting to spin out of control. Then don't think of it as an order, Caelus said calmly, power gathering around his hands, despite the suppression cuffs fighting against it. Think of it as a collaboration, because in about 90 seconds everyone in this academy dies unless we fix this together. For a heartbeat, Selena hesitated. She was proud, stubborn, trained to see him as an enemy. But she was also smart enough to recognize when she was in over her head. What do I need to do? Keep channeling. Don't let the power drop for even a second or the whole thing collapses. I'm going to modify the spell structure from outside the circle. Caelus began to move around the perimeter, hands weaving patterns in the air. His suppression cuffs were glowing red-hot. Fighting against the magic he was channeling, but he pushed through the pain. On my mark, shift your focus to the northern anchor point. I'm going to create a secondary stabilization matrix. That's impossible. The moment you introduce a second channeling source, the primary matrix will interpret it as an attack and auto-collapse. It would, Caelus agreed, if you were working with a normal mage. I wrote the original theory that this ritual is based on. I know exactly how to convince it that I'm part of the intended structure rather than an intrusion. Now stop arguing and trust me, or we're both dead. 60 seconds. Celine made her decision. She shifted her channeling pattern, opening a space in the northern anchor point. Caelus seized the opening, pouring power into the gap, weaving it into a structure that complemented and stabilized Selena's work rather than competing with it. The ritual resisted at first, treating him as an invader. But Caelus had forgotten more about dimensional magic than most mages would ever learn. He spoke to the spell in the language of pure mathematical truth, convinced it through flawless execution that he belonged, that he was necessary, that he was part of the intended design. 40 seconds. The tear in reality stopped growing, began slowly to stabilize. Celine felt the change and gasped. It's working. How are you— Focus, Caelus commanded. We're not done yet. The stabilization will take another 30 seconds and cannot be interrupted. They worked in perfect synchronization, two brilliant minds operating in harmony toward a single goal. Caelus modified the spell structure on the fly, compensating for flaws in the original design that Selene wouldn't have noticed until too late. Selene channeled with precision that bordered on artistic, maintaining exactly the power levels needed without fluctuation. 20 seconds. The portal began to solidify, edges sharpening, the tear becoming a controlled gateway. Through it, Caelus could see another reality, alien and strange, but the connection was stable now. Not safe. Nothing involving dimensional manipulation was truly safe, but controlled, manageable. 10 seconds. On my mark, release the channeling gradually, Caelus instructed. Too fast and we create backlash. Too slow and the portal stays open permanently. Understood. 5 seconds. Now. Together they released their hold on the ritual. Power flowed back into the ambient magical field of the academy, dissipating harmlessly. The portal flickered, shimmered, and then sealed itself shut with a sound like reality sighing in relief. The ritual chamber fell silent except for the sound of their breathing. Selene collapsed to her knees, exhausted. The other 5 instructors she had been draining energy from began to stir, groaning as consciousness returned. Caelus remained standing, though his suppression cuffs were literally melting from the strain of channeling that much power through them. You saved us, Selene said, looking up at him with an expression that was equal parts gratitude and confusion. You could have let it fail, let the portal tear reality apart and escape in the chaos, but you saved us. I'm not the monster you think I am, Caelus replied tiredly. I never was. I made hard choices, yes, ruthless choices, but I never chose destruction when protection was possible. Celine studied him for a long moment. Then she made a decision that would change everything. I'm going to report this incident, she said slowly. But I'm going to report that the ritual began to fail, and I successfully stabilized it with assistance from advanced theoretical knowledge I had been studying. No one else needs to know you were here. Caelus raised an eyebrow. That's a lie. The council trained you to value truth above all else. The council trained me to protect the academy, Celine corrected. And right now, I think the greatest threat to this academy isn't a prisoner who just saved hundreds of lives. It's a power structure so paranoid about losing control that it would rather suppress brilliance than harness it. She stood, wobbling slightly, and fixed him with a steady gaze. I was wrong about you. Maybe not about everything. Maybe you did need to be stopped when you held absolute power. But the person I just worked with to stabilize that ritual? That person had every opportunity to cause chaos, and chose order instead. That person has been teaching students through indirect means, making them better mages. That person is not the tyrant I was told to guard. What are you saying? Caelus asked carefully. I'm saying that I'm going to stop monitoring you quite so closely. I'm saying that the guard schedules might have some convenient gaps. I'm saying that certain restricted texts might end up in places where you could access them if you were careful. Celine took a deep breath. And I'm saying that when the time comes, when you're strong enough to leave this place, I won't stand in your way. It was the last thing Caelus had expected, an offer of freedom from his jailer. He searched her face for deception and found only conviction. Why? He asked. Because I've been asking myself the question you posed months ago. Who stops the council? And I've realized the answer is no one. They're untouchable, unaccountable, claiming to act in everyone's best interest while serving only their own. Someone needs to challenge them. Someone needs to prove that they're not the final arbiters of magical law and capability. She held out her hand. I won't be able to help openly, but perhaps, in small ways, I can assist. Not because I agree with everything you did, but because I think the world needs someone capable of opposing the council's absolute control. Caelus looked at her extended hand, seeing echoes of Mira's offer months ago. He had once stood alone against the world, and it had cost him everything. Perhaps it was time to accept that revolution required more than one person. That changing the world required allies, not subjects. He took her hand. Thank you, he said simply. Don't thank me yet, Celine replied with a wry smile. You're still a prisoner. You're still under suppression. And the council will still execute you if they discover you're regaining power. All I'm offering is a chance. What you do with it is up to you. She left the ritual chamber, taking the unconscious instructors with her via levitation spells. Caelus remained behind, staring at his melted suppression cuffs. They would need to be replaced, which meant he would need to suppress his power again, make it seem like the meltdown was a fluke rather than evidence of his growing capabilities. But for just this moment, he allowed himself to feel the full extent of what he had rebuilt. It wasn't his old power, not yet. That would take years more to fully restore. But it was enough. Enough to cast advanced spells, enough to defend himself if attacked, enough to begin the final phase of his plan. He looked at his hands, channeling a small flame just to feel the joy of magic responding to his will again. The old Caelus Mordain had been powerful and alone. He had built an empire of fear and control. The new Caelus Mordain had allies. Mira, Celine, 27 students who didn't even know they were his. A network being built not through domination but through teaching, through sharing knowledge, through proving that his way of seeing magic could elevate others as it had elevated him. When he finally left this academy, when he stepped back into the world with his power restored, he wouldn't be returning as a tyrant to reclaim his throne. He would be returning as a revolutionary, with an army of brilliant young mages who had learned that the council's limits were artificial, that magic was meant to be explored, not controlled, that power shared became power multiplied. Lyanna had betrayed him to stop a monster. She had created something far more dangerous. She had created a teacher. The final 6 months of Caelus's time at Archon Academy were a masterclass in preparation and patience. Word of his involvement in stopping the dimensional crisis had spread through Celine's network of instructors, though the official story maintained that she had handled it alone. But those who mattered knew the truth, knew that the prisoner, the supposedly powerless former magic lord, had stepped in and saved hundreds of lives with magical skill that should have been impossible. Attitudes shifted. Not openly, the council's representatives still watched him like a hawk, but in subtle ways. Guards were slightly less vigilant. Work assignments put him in areas with more useful resources. The restrictions on his movement relaxed by fractions that individually meant nothing, but collectively gave him significantly more freedom. His power continued to grow. The furnace in his chest was now a controlled inferno, capable of casting spells that would have been considered advanced by any normal mage's standards. He kept most of it suppressed, hidden, but no longer tried to conceal all of it. Let them think he was regaining minor capabilities through sheer stubborn will. It gave him cover to exercise his returning abilities. Mira's study group had expanded to 43 students, nearly 10% of the Academy's population. They called themselves the Free Mind Circle, ostensibly a student organization dedicated to exploring unconventional magical theory. In reality, they were Caelus's unwitting army, being trained in fundamentals that would let them break through the Council's artificial limitations on magical development. The day Caelus chose for his departure wasn't random. It coincided with the Academy's Founders' Day celebration, when security would be focused on managing visiting dignitaries and showing off star students, when everyone would be distracted by pageantry and performance, when no one would notice one prisoner slipping away into the night. He made his final preparations carefully. The Shadow Meld ring, now fully charged and augmented with his own power. A bag of carefully selected artifacts, borrowed from storage over the past months. Detailed maps of the Academy's perimeter wards and their rotation schedules. Everything needed for a clean escape. The night before, he called on Mira one final time in the artifact storage room. "Tomorrow I leave," he said without preamble. Mira had known this day was coming, but the confirmation still hit her hard. "Where will you go?" "Better you don't know. The Council will interrogate everyone connected to me. Genuine ignorance is your best protection." "They'll know I helped you," Mira said. "They'll realize that my improvement, the study group, all of it connects back to you somehow." "Perhaps, but they can't prove it unless you confess. And you won't confess." Caelus handed her a sealed envelope. "This contains everything I've taught you, codified and expanded. Consider it my thank you for your assistance and my hope for your future. Don't read it until I'm gone. The knowledge inside is dangerous, and the Council would definitely execute you if they knew you possessed it. Will I see you again?" "Eventually." Caelus smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he'd worn in years. "When I return, when I'm ready to challenge the Council openly, I'll need talented mages who understand what I'm trying to build. The Free Mind Circle will be the core of something larger. A new way of teaching magic, of sharing power rather than hoarding it. You'll be part of that if you choose." "I choose," Mira said without hesitation. Then impulsively she hugged him. "Thank you. For everything. You gave me a future that the Council would have denied me." Caelus awkwardly returned the embrace. Physical affection was not something he had experienced much of in recent years. "You gave that future to yourself through hard work and dedication. I just showed you what was possible. The achievement was yours." They parted with no further words needed. Some goodbyes were better kept simple. Selene found him in his cell that evening, making a show of her final security check before the big celebration. She closed the door behind her, and disabled the monitoring devices with a casual gesture. The perimeter wards in the eastern section will experience a maintenance failure at midnight, she said, without looking at him. The failure will last approximately 15 minutes before backup systems engage. A person familiar with ward structures could potentially use that window to slip past the barriers undetected. Hypothetically, Caelus said. Hypothetically, Celine agreed. Such a person might also find it useful to know that the guard rotation in that section changes shifts at 10 past midnight, leaving a 3-minute gap in physical surveillance. Useful information for a hypothetical escape attempt. Indeed. Celine finally met his eyes. The council will come after you. They'll hunt you. They'll send their best agents, their most skilled battle mages. They'll want to make an example of you. Let them try. Caelus stood, and despite his prisoner's rags, despite the suppression cuffs still on his wrists, he radiated authority. The council made a mistake when they imprisoned me instead of killing me. They gave me time to think, to plan, to understand my mistakes. The man who ruled as Magic Lord was powerful but flawed. The man who walks out of here tomorrow will be something different. Something better. Or something worse, Celine said quietly. You could take everything you've learned and use it to become an even greater tyrant than before. I could, Caelus acknowledged. Power corrupts, and I have more power than most. But I've also learned that power shared becomes stronger than power hoarded. The council taught me that lesson through their own success. They're a group working in concert, each member strong but together unstoppable. I intend to build something similar. Not through fear and control, but through teaching and elevation. A revolution, Celine said. An evolution, Caelus corrected. The magical world has been stagnant for too long, controlled by a council that values stability over progress. I'm going to change that, whether they like it or not. Celine nodded slowly. Then she did something that surprised them both. She removed the suppression cuffs from his wrists. You'll need these off eventually anyway, she said. Might as well do it now, on your terms rather than theirs. Caelus rubbed his wrists, where the cuffs had rested for 30 months. The relief of having them gone was indescribable. Thank you. For everything. For questioning your orders. For seeing past the propaganda. For giving me a chance. I'm not sure I'm doing the right thing, Celine admitted. But I'm certain the council's way is wrong. So I'll take my chances with you and hope I don't regret it. If you do, regret it, Caelus said seriously. Know that you can come find me. Whatever I build, however I change the world, there will always be a place for those who helped me when I had nothing. Celine left without further words. Caelus spent the rest of the evening in meditation, preparing his mind and magic for what would come. At midnight, as promised, he felt the perimeter wards fail. He activated the Shadow Meld ring, gathered his few possessions, and walked out of his cell for the last time. The escape was anticlimactic, which was exactly how he had planned it. No alarms, no guards, no dramatic confrontations, just a shadow moving through the academy, slipping past the gaps in security, navigating with the confidence of someone who had spent 3 years learning every possible route and exit. By the time the sun rose on Founder's Day, Caelus Mordain was 50 miles away, his trail carefully obscured by misdirection spells and false leads. The council would eventually realize he was gone. They would launch a manhunt. They would call him a dangerous fugitive and warn all the kingdoms that he was at large. But they would be too late. The seeds had been planted. The network was built. Students across the academy had learned new ways of thinking about magic, new possibilities for their development. And somewhere out in the world, a fallen magic lord walked free, his power returning, his mind sharp, his purpose clear. The age of the council was coming to an end. The age of the free minds was beginning. And standing at the center of it all, orchestrating the revolution that would reshape magical society, was a man who had learned through betrayal that true power comes not from dominating others, but from elevating them. Caelus Mordain was free, and the world would never be the same. Epilogue. 3 years later, in a small tavern on the outskirts of civilization, a woman sat alone nursing a drink she wasn't really tasting. Lyanna Shadowvale, Speaker of the Council of 12, looked tired in a way that went beyond physical exhaustion. The weight of leadership had carved lines into her face that hadn't been there when she had betrayed the man she loved to save the world. The world hadn't been saved. She had known things were going wrong 6 months after Caelus's imprisonment. Small things at first. Increased demon activity along the borders that used to be protected by his wards. A rising tide of magical anomalies that he would have detected and corrected before they became dangerous. Kingdoms that had once feared his power, now squabbling amongst themselves, without his stabilizing influence. Then the reports started coming in about the Free Minds movement, a grassroots organization of talented young mages who were teaching revolutionary magical theories, breaking through barriers that the Council had carefully maintained, demonstrating capabilities that should have been impossible. When the Council investigated, they found the movement's teachings all traced back to principles developed by one person, Caelus Mordain. He had never stopped teaching. Even imprisoned, even stripped of power, he had found a way to spread his knowledge, to build the very revolution the Council had imprisoned him to prevent. And now he was free, rumors placing him everywhere and nowhere, building an organization that threatened the Council's monopoly on magical authority. The door to the tavern opened. Lyanna didn't look up. She knew who it would be. Had known the moment she had chosen this particular tavern, in this particular city, that he would find her. That he would come. Caelus Mordain slid into the seat across from her. He looked different. Younger somehow, despite the years. The power had returned to him, that was obvious. But there was something else too. A peace that hadn't been there before. A confidence that wasn't born of domination but of purpose. "You knew I'd come," he said. Not a question. "You always were predictable in some ways," Lyanna replied, finally meeting his eyes. "I heard about your movement. The Free Minds. Very clever. Building a revolution one student at a time." "I learned from the best," Caelus said with a slight smile. "The Council does the same thing after all, just in reverse. One student at a time, teaching limitation instead of possibility." They sat in silence for a moment. Two people who had once loved each other, who had changed the world together, who had betrayed and been betrayed. "I was wrong," Lyanna said finally. "Not about everything. You were dangerous. You did need to be stopped. But the way we did it, the system we built to replace you, it's just another form of tyranny. Different master, same chains." "And now?" Caelus asked. "Now I'm tired," Lyanna admitted. "Tired of politics, tired of controlling, tired of pretending that what we're doing is noble when really it's just self-preservation dressed up as governance. The other council members voted to have you assassinated when they learned you'd escaped. I'm the only one who voted against it. Why? Because despite everything, despite the betrayal and the pain and the years of regret, I still believe in the man you could become. Not the tyrant. Not the magic lord who scared the world. But the teacher. The man who saved those students during the proving. The man who stopped Selena's ritual from destroying the academy. That man deserves a chance to change things properly." Caelus studied her face, searching for deception, for manipulation. He found only exhaustion and something that might have been hope. "What are you asking for?" he said. "A place," Lyanna said simply. "In whatever you're building. I can't stand against the Council openly, not yet. But I can work from within, undermine their worst impulses, protect your people when they overstep. And eventually, when the time is right, I can step down and join your revolution officially." "You betrayed me once," Caelus said quietly. "Poisoned me. Imprisoned me. Took everything I was. Why should I trust you now?" "You shouldn't," Lyanna said with brutal honesty. "I don't deserve your trust, But I'm asking for it anyway, because I think the world needs what you're trying to build, and because—" her voice broke slightly. "Because I miss him. The man you were before power corrupted you. I see glimpses of him in what you're doing now. And I want to believe that maybe, somehow, we can both become better than we were." Caelus was quiet for a long time. Every tactical instinct he had screamed that this was a trap, that trusting her again would be the ultimate foolishness, that she could and would betray him a second time if it served her purposes. But he had learned something in those 3 years at the academy. He had learned that revolution required trust, that changing the world required taking risks, that the only way to break cycles of betrayal and vengeance was to offer forgiveness, even when it wasn't deserved. "You can't undo what you did," he said finally. "The man you loved died in that moment when you made me drink the poison. He's not coming back." "I know," Lyanna whispered. "But," Caelus continued, "the man I am now believes in second chances, in redemption, in the possibility that people can change, can grow, can become better than they were." He extended his hand across the table. "You betrayed me to stop a monster. Help me prove that I never needed to be one in the first place." Lyanna stared at his hand, tears streaming down her face. Then she took it. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said. "Good," Caelus replied, "because we have a lot of work to do. The council won't fall easily. The old guard will fight to maintain their control. It's going to be dangerous, possibly fatal for all of us." "Then I'll die fighting for something I actually believe in," Lyanna said, "instead of maintaining a system I've come to despise." They talked until dawn, planning, strategizing, rebuilding not their relationship, but a partnership based on shared purpose rather than love. It wasn't forgiveness, not really. The hurt was still too fresh, the betrayal too deep. But it was a beginning, a chance at something better. When the sun finally rose, they parted ways, Caelus to continue building his revolution, one freed mind at a time. Lyanna to return to the council, to fight from within, to slowly dismantle the very system she had helped create. And somewhere in the future, visible only to those who understood the deep currents of magical power and political change, a new age was beginning. An age where magic would be taught, not controlled. Shared, not hoarded. Used to elevate everyone rather than concentrate power in the hands of a few. The age of the free minds. It would take years, decades perhaps. There would be setbacks, battles, casualties. The council would fight desperately to maintain their monopoly. Blood would be spilled on both sides. But in the end, in the long arc of history, those who fight for freedom always triumph over those who fight for control. Caelus Mordain had learned that lesson the hard way, through betrayal and imprisonment and slow rebuilding. Now he was going to teach it to the world. One freed mind at a time. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, revenge, and redemption, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. I've got plenty more manhwa recaps coming your way, diving deep into worlds where the powerful fall, the weak rise, and nothing is ever quite what it seems. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload, and drop a comment below telling me what manhwa you'd like to see next. Your support means everything and helps me keep bringing you these epic stories. Until next time, keep reading, keep dreaming, and remember, even in your darkest moment, you might just be one chapter away from becoming unstoppable.